to say thank you to you all for coming tonight. We're really delighted to be welcoming our new female Provost, Dr. Claire Craig, to share with us her thoughts on the college and all the questions that you've submitted prior to this. Without further ado, I'd like to basically start the conversation with Dr. Claire Craig and Janet Hayes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Laurianne. Well, I'm absolutely delighted that we're able to have this conversation with Claire. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to ask questions. Some really good questions came through from you, so thank you for that. That's why I've got my crib notes here, because I want to make sure I actually ask the questions that you posed and not a random set I've made up. If there is time at the end, and I'm anticipating there probably will be, there will be time for questions from the floor at the end. So if you do have questions you'd like to ask Claire, please start to frame those as we go through. So starting with which is the sort of start of interview question, which I remember asking many times. So how did you become, well, not in this ilk, how did you become head of house, and why did you decide to take on the role?
Okay, thank you. Lovely to be here. And the last time I was talking in front of around this number of people, it was actually while I was being interviewed by the entire governing body for this post. So I hope your questions are a little easier than those. But in fact, I realised, looking at this question, that I owe the fact that I'm here to the Queen's Women's Network, because my understanding is that it was in the discussions that were going on with members of the Queen's Network that the college, that really influenced the college towards doing what it did, which is that it took a really sensible view that it needed to employ an executive search agency, a headhunter. Now that's not what all colleges always do. And more than that, it actually employed an executive agency that specialises in diversity. That company is called Maloney Associates, if anybody ever wants to use it again. They knew me because I'd had engagement with them sort of several years ago. So anyhow, so the college hired the agency, and they came to me, and I was interested because my background, many of you may know, is around science and humanities in public policy, so climate change, AI, genetic technologies, conflict resolution, whatever it might be, but kind of I worked in government. And what that tells you is two things really matter and are really rare. One is places where people from different disciplines come together. Yeah, the humanities, you get history and engineering around the same table. And the other is places where different generations come together. Right across the spectrum. And that's actually, because that's the way that you solve problems, that's the way that you solve climate change or whatever it might be. And those places are really rare. And in fact, if colleges didn't exist from 1341, you'd probably need to invent them right now, because they're one of the few places where that sort of mixing of generations and subjects happens. Anyhow, so that's always been a thing that I'm really interested in. So I thought, this is very interesting. College, that's kind of... And also, I've got a very zigzag career. I can retrofit some logic to it, but there isn't any logic to it, really. But consistently, I've worked with scientists and scholars trying to, in some sense, help them to be the best that they can be. In other words, I can run things. I've done management, kind of building control, done marketing, stuff that academics generally don't like. But I really enjoy working with academics, with fellows and others, scholars and scientists. And so again, being this kind of very strange job sort of fits a very strange background. Then what happened was I hadn't really, I'm from the other place, and I feel it's really kind of you to invite me into your, and there's a nice symmetry, because I did actually go I went up as an undergraduate in 1979, so there's a lovely symmetry there. But I didn't really know Oxford, and I certainly didn't know Queen's, and I did what I think a number of people do, and some of the freshers that I met this autumn have also told me they did, which is to say, I walked unwittingly along the high street, and I went up the steps and through into the front quad, and I basically fell in love. And it's a lovely place. And then during the interview process, there was an amazing moment where I was also I was going to say speed dated, that's not quite right, speed interviewed. So I kind of sat there and fellows would come in pairs and sit around and I have to talk to them for 3 minutes each and then they kind of move. And it was good, you know, because it was partly about them getting to know me and me getting to know them. So anyhow, that was a rather long answer, but the main thing is I'm really privileged. I also, I think, would say I've spent, because I'm new to the college and new to Oxford, this is halfway through my first year, I've spent my first term going out and meeting fellows in their places of work, really to get an understanding of them and their interests. And that means I've seen the diaries that Howard Carter wrote on the day that he saw first the tomb of Tutankhamun, because they're in the basement of one of the museums. And I've seen quantum laboratories and so on. But anyhow, it's really about getting to know the fellows. And then meeting the freshers, and I don't know if you all did this when in your sort of different eras, but shaking hands, when you could still do that, with all of the freshers the first term, and then Provost academic collections and kind of getting to know students. So it's been a learning, and this for me and the conversations here are also part of getting a sense of what you're interested in and what you want from the college and what your experiences were and what you want it to be. That was a very long answer to your first question. The others will be shorter.
Thank you. Great answer. I don't know how I felt my spine tingle. Talked about arriving in Queens and looking at front quad. I definitely felt that at that moment. So the rest of the questions I'm going to put now have actually been raised by all members. So hopefully you'll recognise, those of you who ask questions, hopefully you'll recognise the questions that I'm asking. So the first one is, what's the best piece of advice that anyone's given you in your career?
So the best piece of advice was actually quite late on. I was at an event actually with with undergraduates and alumni in a different place, and a woman who was an expert in an HR consultant said, of course, she said, young people who can do quite well, they do take longer to work out what they really want to do. And actually that can be even midlife, yeah? And because what happens, and this was so true for me, and it was really helpful because then it was that if you can do reasonably well in your exams, and if you can basically get the degree result that you kind of expect, it's easy to go along with people's expectations. Whereas if you weren't living up to anybody's expectations, you were never going to, you kind of have to work it out for yourself what you want to do. And I thought that was really helpful because I'd started off in the public sector. My mother was a Labour councillor and a magistrate, and my father was a vicar, and I didn't know anything else, And it took me 10 years to work out that there was a private sector. And then I went there. Anyhow, so that was, I think that notion that don't live up to other people's expectations, I suppose, is the simple bit. Yeah.
Do what you want to do. Yeah. Okay. So I guess a little bit different, but in terms of discrimination that you might have experienced in your career, do you have any examples of discrimination that you've experienced and how you've dealt with it?
This is something that'd be interesting to come back to when we're in open conversation. So I've never experienced explicit major discrimination that I'm aware of, and I think I'm very, very lucky in that. On the other hand, like everybody in the room, actually like the human race, I have certainly experienced all sorts of kind of embedded implicit discrimination at different times. And I think the things, and I went through 3 phases really, kind of blissful ignorance. So as I said, kind of grew up in a fairly sheltered background, went to a girls' school at age 11, was the oldest child, didn't realise that girls don't do physics, just didn't occur to me because, why would it? So it was kind of blissful ignorance, and then a kind of rude awakening, and kind of quite a long period of I think oversensitivity in some sense about discrimination, in the sense of every time I couldn't get a word in edgeways, or every time somebody explained something to me that I knew very well, the mansplaining, all those small things got so cross, and then I guess I'm sort of in a third phase of of trying to live with them and pick my moments and pick my battles and make changes, but not make changes out of just inchoate anger. Make them where I can make a difference. But I do feel I'm probably really fortunate in that sense. The other thing I'd say is that sort of more recently, somebody, it wasn't in the question, but somebody more recently asked me about positive discrimination, and obviously these are things which are really active issues for us. I certainly feel I benefited consistently in the last few years from the sort of people reaching out. In other words, you know, in professional circles in the UK, which are only a tiny part of the whole issue of women, but actually there's more reaching out, and I feel that that's been helpful. Maybe it's only counterbalancing some of the things that have made life difficult, but I certainly feel I've got some positions or done some projects or been in some rooms that I might not otherwise have been if people hadn't been acting positively to discriminate in that way, and I'd like to continue doing that. And it's something that we're talking about in our access and outreach programmes, that kind of positive discrimination.
Yeah. So admitting women into Queen's, so this is actually a combined question that we've put two questions together, but admitting women into Queen's was clearly a turning point, maybe the wrong word, but significant in the evolution of the college. In terms of now and going forward, what would you see might be the equivalent of admitting women?
So I still think I'm still in the kind of celebratory mode, actually. I'm in the sense it's a really big deal. I mean, 79 was a really big year, and that only happens once. Two things really. One is that kind of binary moment only happens once, but in a sense it's opened the floodgates to a self-awareness about a whole range of different forms of diversity that we totally need to address. And for me now, what the college does about socioeconomic diversity, what it does about race and culture and ethnicity and religion and sexual orientation, all of the things. I mean, those are incredibly important and really still at an early stage in a way. We've had a lovely thing recently, which is an old member has funded us a second person for outreach. We had one person, we've now got two people, and that means we can underpin what's also a really good initiative, which is the colleges with their interests in the northwest of England. I don't know if you know, but the colleges have divided up the whole of the UK, and you can go and do outreach in your designated areas. That's a bit kind of tribal. So we got together in the northwest. So we're Queen's is actually, through its old member, is supporting a coalition of colleges really trying to build strategic relationships in the northwest with individual schools or with civil groups or whatever it might be. That kind of thing's really interesting and really important. So that's the next phase. Having said that, the business of women is not done. And so, I mean, I think that there's lots, and again, it'd be really interesting to hear more and talk more during the evening, to do. Just having got through the doors is not enough. It's really not enough. Admissions are still patchy by discipline. Young women still face differential sorts of challenges and questions at every point in their life stages, and a network like this, which does bring together generations, can be really helpful. The most recent for us is that the small issue, but we want to help some students who are thinking about how they can be more active in tutorials. I don't know if any of you remember tutorials with sort of pleasure or with horror, but for some people the challenge of speaking out in that group can be really big. So we're going to run some sessions on we're calling them leadership, because you can be a leader at any level, but actually on confidence building. And what they want, these young women, is to see young women who are just adjacent to them, sort of 10 years, up to 10 years, sort of old members. So we're going to do that. But actually there are equivalent sort of, learning points all along the life course, and a network can really help.
Yeah, there's anybody here who's in that bracket.
There's lots to do at every age bracket.
So, just picking up the networks point, do you still feel that we need women's networks like this then in 2020? And why would that be the case? My starting point is that's kind of, it's not for me, it's for you. You've set it up and you're running it and doing it and making it what it is. I think there's a kind of
range of situations, in sort of informal and informal, and this is a long answer, by the way. Clearly, it's not a yes or no answer, right? So the answer is it depends. I think that women's networks can be incredibly valuable. Often when they're about refreshment and regeneration, when they're about kind of creating ideas, not when they're simply places of refuge and kind of retreat. And I don't get any sense that that's what this one's about, but sometimes they can feel a little bit like that. And I think that's less helpful. But if they're kind of about inspiration and about connection, then that's brilliant. The other kind of test that I would bring, and I'm delighted that this one passes this because of our we've got our one gentleman member here, is I always ask myself kind of in situations, what would I feel like? What would my emotional reaction to this situation be if the genders were reversed? And I think that that therefore kind of networks are really important. I like the fact that this is open. I do think there needs to be space for women's only conversations sometimes, but one wouldn't want to feel that they were kind of creating situations where if they were men doing it, I would be uncomfortable. That's my kind of intuitive test. It's not a very scientific one, but it's just...
Yeah, thank you. So where do you see the role of women in the workplace and in domestic life?
This was such a... It's like, who am I to say? Goodness knows. But it prompts a couple of thoughts. I mean, one is that... one is clearly the sort of, the big issue for most women about how you go about being a professional and a whole person. Is children and childcare and what that means for your life. Statistically speaking, that is true, and it's the single, probably most important thing. So I guess in 10 years' time, what I'd like to see is that the practices, the behaviours between women and men in this country are the same. In other words, men do as much of the housework and of the chores or whatever it might be as women, which they don't at the moment, and they take as much time off. That's important, and you can see the workplace changing because more men feel able to say things about family life much more than they used to, and that's brilliant. I have a different point to make, though, which is maybe only relevant to some of you. But, I mean, I don't have children. There have been times for me when I felt that I don't fit in either camp, particularly because I did physics and maths, and I've worked a lot in male-dominated environments. And, I kind of feel like I'm here, and people can still say, women's brains don't do maths. It can still, it's still said sometimes. Well, so I'm not really one of them. And then there's these women and they get together and they talk about childcare, and I'm not one of them either. And that can be a bit uncomfortable, actually, until you kind of get around to the fact that for me, it's about being. Oh, sorry, it sounds so trite. It's about being yourself. It's about treating people as individuals, and also not accepting buckets that put everybody in a kind of gendered position in a really binary way, which is counterproductive at all sorts of levels. Again, that was a slightly tangential answer to your question, but
I think authenticity is a theme that very much comes through, and I just hear that. I heard that this morning at an International Women's Day event I went to. That it just keeps coming through. Yeah. I think for men and women, it's a big theme nowadays of being yourself, being true to yourself. And that doesn't mean conforming to a notion of what a woman should be, or what a man should be, or what a scientist should be, or what a mother should be. I don't know. Anyhow, yeah, definitely. What do you think needs to be done to ensure that the staff, the students, the fellows, all the people that make Queen's this holistic, the old members, make Queen's this holistic community? What do you think can be done to ensure that it is a united group of people going forward? I thought it was a really interesting question, and the kind of heart of it for me, and it's a work in progress. And I mean, I know you were involved in earlier stages, and the heart of it for me is about mutual respect, basically, in the sense that we have
people who are, at the forefront of research or the forefront of teaching. We have these incredible bright young people. We have people who can literally carve a banister out of wood in ways that are incredibly rare and difficult skill. And cook meals. There were 27 diets combinations for 40 people at dinner earlier this week. Can you imagine just the sheer professionalism of being able to do that at the quality expected at an Oxford college? So sorry, I'm getting on my hobby horse, but I think bringing the groups together is about creating an environment of respect and kind of high standards and high levels of support. In particular, I think it's my role to connect, which is you guys. And in fact, one of the things that's been really interesting to me is that old members, even if you individually perhaps only come back, I don't know, once a year or not that, in fact, you're a very visible part of the community. There are things happening in college that connect the college with its old members quite frequently. So you're also part of kind of refreshing and directing it in all sorts of ways. So that's another sort of question about how to create the spaces, how to create the conversations, how to create the projects and the goals that bring people together. I'll give you a practical example, because that maybe was a bit philosophical, but rather like I said, when a student said, how can you help me to be more comfortable in tutorials? We didn't make it just the student's problem or just the tutor's problem. We're actually bringing in some old members to do it. There's a really exciting and quite risky initiative going on within the college now about food. Because food, I don't know if you know, but food is one of those things which kind of by reputation can really get, colleges and institutions quite excited, and any change to food whatsoever. But what we're doing is creating working groups between staff and fellows and students, looking at things like purchasing, and basically we're trying to look at diets that are good for the planet and good for human health together, and doing it in a way that's quite, well, as far as I can tell, quite new to the college. And that kind of bringing people together to work on a shared problem is really good, not just for itself, because you get better answers, but actually is a new way of working. We're in the autumn going to start a review of our investment practices. We don't invest directly in companies, so we're not in the firing line around, do we invest in BP or anything like that, so we're starting with investment. We've got a wonderful working group led by Richard Nickerson, who's a physicist, which is insisting on being properly scientific about everything that we do within the college. So we've got the most gorgeous kind of graphs and experiments going on about behaviour change and about where we put double glazing and how we kind of change the building. It's really good, rigorous stuff. So sorry, I can say I'm rather enjoying the kind of geekiness of it. And as I said, we've got the food initiative going on as well, which is about planetary health as well as about human health. So that's what the college is doing. On the wider question, partly because my background is science and government, I'm going to say one kind of personal comment, which is this. I think that the willingness of people to take action themselves now is brilliant. I do think that there's nothing that we can do within the existing socio-economic regulatory frameworks that will be sufficient. So I also think we have to keep the pressure on governments to change all sorts of policies and practices, taxation and so on and so on, in order for there to be enough change.
Do you have a project that you could share, anything with us that you might really want to change during your time as Provost of Queen's?
Again, it's a very good question. And I'm itching to say, yeah, follow me, this direction here. It is not like that in a college right now. Yeah, the colleges, colleges more generally, they are organic, fascinating mixes of the communities that we were just talking about. And frankly, if I'd have walked in that first day and said, we're going here, the one thing I can be sure of is that that's not the way we would have gone. It's a really fellowships are just that, they are fellowships. So I'm I mean, at the moment, I mean, I have a sense of direction. I can tell you several things that I think are really important, but part of this is working out where the real energy and enthusiasm of the fellowship and of the students is, because it needs to come out of them. That's what they want. This role is not like being, you know, chief executive. It's not like being... I'm so tickled at being mentioned in the same breath as Obama, but it's really not like being. It's going to go down in my memory, but it's not like being a chief executive of an organisation. It's certainly not like any other job I've had. It's more consensual. It's more about community building. It's got to come out of what Queen's is. Now, the kind of directions which are clearly there, and I think are the ones that will build, and just quite how and in what way and at what speed. Ask me next year and I'll have a more detailed answer. But all the things that are about diversity and inclusivity and accessibility are much more complicated than they kind of look. We all sort of know what we want to do, and we want to broaden socioeconomic, all the categories that I just talked about. We'd like the membership of the college to be this mix that redesigns society, rather than what society with all its strengths and flaws gives us out of its current systems. So there is that direction. What are the real... what's going to be the thing that in 10 years' time we look back then and say, right, this was the seed that was set? I don't know. At the moment, I think the sort of what's going on in the north is really important. The college has slightly lost its northern connections when the Hastings scholarships and others went, and that was for good reasons. But something of that sense of reaching out beyond the normal elite, that's inclusive as well, so not just the north but other places that see themselves as... I come from the southwest, and there are areas, so that's one. A second, and linked to that actually, and this is, as you can see why I haven't got a simple answer, is kind of it's not just getting people in, it's how they feel when they're there. If you take all of the kind of the anxieties, the stress, the kind of the pressures on every part of the membership of the college, not just undergraduates actually. Early career researchers have some of the poorest mental health of any equivalent group in society, because of the kind of fragility of research life. So how can we make it not just get the people in, but have them thrive when they're there? Is a whole other set of questions, and then thrive going beyond, which is where you guys come back in, because actually some of that is going to be about the kind of connectedness of the community. So there's that cluster. There's the sustainability and some of the big buildings questions and kind of landmark questions. Flory, who was in Flory? Just out of interest. Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, I mean, so at the moment Flory is mothballed, while we explore all of the options, since it was rather suddenly 2-star listed, grade 2-star listed. So there'll be some big buildings questions as well, and sustainability. The thing that is not so high profile but matters a lot to me, which I've already begun to do things about, is what I'm kind of calling porosity. So Queen's is lovely, but it's a kind of perfectly formed thing. It's got humanities and it's got sciences and it's got its gorgeous quads, and there's a bit of it hides its light under a bushel, and some of that's really good. It's about being unpretentious. It's about not being, brash. And it's one of the things people love about it. The freshers say, it's a friendly college compared with what their cohorts are saying in other it's really friendly, lovely. But could we have all of that and actually just be a little bit more out there, have people coming in more? We don't have very many, colloquia or talks, or we don't have very many. We have one visiting fellowship scheme on American history. We don't have people coming in and out. We're not that visible. So the kind of porosity, the real world flowing through the college in a way that perhaps it could more. Now that's not as high profile as sustainability or access, but it's another one that I think could actually make quite a substantial difference over time to the quality of the life of the people in the college.
I was just wondering, sort of recalling from my days at the college, we had the chaplain and just trying, there were sort of moral support networks. I'm just wondering, has that evolved in any way? And then plans to explain that?
Yeah. It has, and it's still a work in progress, because there are all sorts of different ways of kind of trying to provide the the support and the environment that students might want. And we've got some students here who might want to say more, either now or over dinner. The biggest single step is that we now have a welfare officer. So our overall approach, I mean, other than trying to make the kind of environment and the teaching and the kind of expectations as kind of both challenging and supportive as they can be, is to make sure that there are multiple places that anybody who is at any degree of concern or anxiety can go. Because essentially different people will have different degrees of comfort or expectation about who they might talk to and at what point. I mean, the Scouts, to go back to the intermingling of staff and students and so on. I mean, the Scouts and the people and the porters and the people in the bar are all actually important parts of helping students and kind of making sure that we pick up on things. We have a dedicated welfare officer, which I think is relatively new. It just predates me, but it may only be a couple of years. Kate, do you know? Is it a couple of years? Anyhow.
Yeah, this year.
This year, okay. So it's a sign of the times. So she's available. So she's available for people to talk to. What we're trying very hard not to do is, as it were, give the kind of expert medical advice that should be being given by people like you or by professional counselling services. It's quite a big deal because obviously there's a bit of a tendency to try and overhelp sometimes. What we're trying to do is make sure there's lots of places people can raise things. Sometimes it's just normal anxiety, homesickness, a bit of imposter syndrome. It's the kind of things that with people can talk about, they can work through. But we want to be really careful to catch the more serious problems and then to point them in the right direction. And the welfare officer, along with the chaplain, along with the dean, along with the junior deans, along with the welfare fellow, and I probably missed somebody else out, as well as the staff, are kind of, that's part of the network. Does that help answer your question? Yeah.
I'd like to ask Claire a question in the context of us being here today. I think one of the things that women do particularly well is collaboration and making connections. I heard you speak about the staff, and certainly for me, many of my fondest memories are about the staff, be it Geordie the porter, be it Nigel the steward, and I could go on. And I was quite interested to hear you mention staff, and I wondered how much of a voice has been heard or could be heard in terms of shaping the future and making sure that they feel very much part of that, and possibly that their ideas can contribute to that.
Well, we're certainly, as I've mentioned, we're doing this for the first time in a kind of structured way with the new initiative on diet for the planet and human health. If I've understood your question right, so we have we have staff from all the different teams, and that's kind of, it's actually, I don't think people realise it, but it's not only an interesting initiative in its own right, it's also creating connections and creating assumptions about how other things might be done that I think will be really important for that kind of different way of different relationship. So it's the first time, so as I said, that for a big question, the staff have been involved right at the start. So we've got on the one hand we've got some of the fellows taking an incredibly academically rigorous approach to the purchasing question and how you measure sustainability in purchasing, and on the other hand we've got people from the conference team and from the catering team who are coming at it from completely different perspectives, and it's really interesting, and all sides are finding it interesting. So, I mean, am I...
Yes, I think it goes beyond that. It's about the community and its well-being. It's about the community and the way in which it structures and organises the practicalities of collegiate life, and whether the staff do have and can have a voice in shaping that.
Yes, I mean, I certainly hope so. I guess I'm not quite understanding your question. I think are you saying? I mean, we've. No, I don't understand your question.
I think that staff have always gone that extra mile.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure how much in the past that's necessarily been recognised and how much
Right.
part of the team and how
Right.
respected they may have felt. And I'm just wondering whether there's an opportunity to really sew all of that together.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
in terms of shaping the future
Yeah,
and creating
yeah, okay.
a strategic plan for the college,
Yeah. Yeah.
whether that side of things
Okay,
can be woven in.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, I think it's a really good point. I think I agree with it. I can see how it's happening in individual circumstances. I need to think about whether there's something sort of bigger behind it. We don't have a strategic plan, and at the moment, it's not a college that wants a kind of, you know, glossy top-down strategic plan. It's more about making the right kind of connections and getting people involved in individual initiatives, which will in fact be strategic, but we don't kind of start with the S word, if you like.
You just mentioned imposter syndrome, and I find it a really interesting topic at the moment. So I've spoken with a couple of people that have mentioned it recently, and I was just wondering what your thoughts were on how to deal with it, because it is something that I've suffered myself, and I find it really hard where male contemporaries might not necessarily feel the same way.
No. Oh, I wish I had the answers to everything. I'm an imposter. I've got them. So let me treat it seriously for a moment. I think one thing is knowing that an awful lot of people share it, including a lot of the men that really don't look as if they do. I mean, seriously, they often cover it up better, and also they're under social pressure not to show it in a way that I think women aren't so much. But putting that to one side, it is a real thing. For me, the biggest thing was actually that the imposter syndrome went with recrimination. So I would find it a lot of mine, I find it very difficult to talk in meetings, for example, because I felt I had to say something that was brilliant, and, you know, would wow the room and move everything on, or whatever. And then if I said anything at all, I can remember saying something in a meeting at one end of Whitehall, and I went out of the room and I thought, that was really stupid. They think I'm a fool. I'm never going to get another job. I'm going to therefore lose my income, and then I'll lose my house, and then my husband will divorce me. I absolutely. I think by the time I got to Parliament Square from Trafalgar Square, it was real. Yeah. So I kind of. For me at least, it was kind of, well, I can fake it a bit. I'm an imposter. I'll fake it a bit, and then I won't worry about what I've done. I'll move on and kind of have another go and kind of learn and that was that was one of the techniques for me. I think we all have different ways.
I haven't worked out any techniques.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're doing a good start, because even asking a question is a good one.
It's a topic that keeps coming up.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I hope I grow out of it soon.
Yeah.
I interviewed quite a lot of female partners as part of research I've done recently for a master's, and I think out of the 17 I interviewed, 15 of them said they'd had confidence issues. 2 of them said they felt they weren't different to anyone else, but 15 of them said that. And Claire mentioned opportunities earlier, and I think a lot of them who'd done well had early opportunities from others, and I think whether they're early or not, and you talked about early career fellows, I think giving people opportunities at every stage of their life course is a really important thing to be able to do, and I think support networks like this really help with that. And you've talked about support of others frequently, and I think that's really important, and for me, one thing that's important about this group. But anyway, it's not it. Thank you. That was absolutely brilliant.